Good morning or afternoon, everyone. I'm Hank Hauser from QT, Curriculum and Learning Designer. Welcome to this first TELedvisors webinar of 2019. Very exciting. There's going to be quite a few to follow. But this one, we thought for the start, we will look at the future. And so this webinar is about the future of technology enhanced learning. So there's a few questions there, and we've got a range of presenters there. So there's Sarah Thorneycroft, Kate Mitchell, Marlene Daicopoulos, then and Tom Worthington to cap it off. All right, so we'll move on to Kate Mitchell, who's a senior learning designer at La Trobe.
Cool. All right. So mine's probably going to be a little bit loose, like Sarah's, just because I wrote the blog post and sort of didn't think I was going to present, and I've also, I'm dealing with a 1-year-old who doesn't sleep particularly well, and she just had she's just been sick as well. So so hopefully my presentation makes sense, but please feel free to just ask me questions. So what I did, I'll just bring it up. If I can bring up my blog post, if it lets me. Okay, let's see if we can bring it up. So I wrote a blog post, which I know Hank's been pushing out a little bit, and it was called "Where's My Educational Jetpack?" If I bring it in here, hopefully that will, yeah, there you can see it. So which covers, it was really just meant to be a little bit of a setting the scene and doing a bit of a literature kind of sweep. So gathering some of the kind of common documents that we are kind of privy to as TELedvisors, and that often are trying to, I guess, state what the future might look like for TEL. So in particular the what used to be NMC and is now EDUCAUR's Horizon reports, some stuff from JISC, a couple other things that had found their way to me via people's discussions at the ACODE conference. So there was an Ernst & Young report that came out, so a few other things like that. So really my intent with that that blog post was really just to kind of raise some questions that might help people think about the future of TEL in relation to this webinar. What it kind of ended up becoming was almost this, dare I say it, kind of, I guess, call to social justice. Not quite in so many words, not as strong as that, but certainly by the end I kind of looked back at it and went, I've sort of started off just trying to propose some questions and do a sweep of articles that I think people could read and help with their thinking, for it to then, based on the themes that were coming out, for it to become this sort of call to arms almost around what do we want TEL to look like, or what should it look like, and a lot of that is sort of becoming around, I guess, what shouldn't it look like, and what are the connections and the I guess possibilities that we want for TEL, and what's I guess, what do we want for TEL as opposed to what don't we want, and some of that might be around when shouldn't we use the technology. And so I think especially at the moment there's sort of this proposed big change happening in education where we're trying to accommodate this changing workforce, trying to accommodate this change to our financial situations a lot of times, because as we all know, higher ed is often at the whim of government funding, and that can be really tenuous. So there's kind of this real need to change being pushed a lot of the time, but we're sort of not, often that's sort of in response to this neoliberal kind of commercialized agenda, rather than thinking about, well, what do we actually want for staff and students, and what do we want education to look like, in terms of, I guess, a human perspective, a little bit like Sarah. So it sort of took on this turn by the end that I wasn't expecting it to. Just in terms of, I guess, some of the things that came out, one of the articles that I mentioned was around looking how to think like a futurist and looking for trends and tides and signs. It should be in the blog post if you want to have a look. Some of the themes that I saw coming out were around technologies, but a lot of them were sort of bigger themes. So blended learning sort of still gets mentioned, digital literacy, institutional values and direction, graduate employability, student well-being, and in terms of some of the technologies, things like adaptive learning, I kind of take that as a bigger theme around differentiation and pathways. So what I ended up doing, if I can bring it up, let's see if I can switch my, there we go, switch my, hopefully you can see that. I sort of did this graphic just recently. I kind of, it's no by no means flawless, but I kind of saw that there were these bigger themes coming out, and so I tried to sort of capture them a little bit. We've got connection and collaboration, flexibility and differentiation, innovation, employability, and equity and well-being. So for me, I was thinking, well, connection and collaboration is where things like apart from, say, your LMS tools, but also learning spaces, the way that learning spaces are designed, the way that university teaching takes place, or tertiary teaching takes place, when and where that happens, flexibility and differentiation, adaptive learning, blended learning, and analytics can come into these. Innovation and employability, things like partnerships, micro-credentials, capabilities, and also the notion of failure and risk, and being able to take risks and fail within things like assessments. Also taking on things like work integrated learning, and then equity and well-being. So which, apart from well-being, I think things like digital literacy skills, or digital literacy issues can potentially come into here. Also even things like authentic assessment and the way that you build that in, some of that can come in to innovation and employability as well, in terms of building relevant assessments that align with industry, or have partnerships with industry and employers. But also, I guess, this sense of equity and accessibility and inclusiveness, belonging, all of those ideas that seem to be coming out quite a bit in terms of not always in the bigger reports, but certainly I've seen that a lot of institutional strategic plans are really highlighting those as particular agendas they want to look to fulfill. So I think that it's nice to think about this one, and not just equity for students and wellbeing for students, but also for staff. So staff development and how we support academic teaching staff and other staff. So that's kind of where I guess I got up to in terms of thinking about. Let me just bring my thing back so that I can bring up my application again. Okay. So that's where I got up to with, oops, where's it gone? That was this one, there we go. Strategic thinking, setting the scene. You can still see that, yes. So in terms of, I guess, some of the myths that were coming out as well, because I know that Hank asked me to talk a little bit about myths. Some of the things that came out that I thought were things that people might consider, you tend to think of them as default, but they're not necessarily. Students are digitally literate, which I think most of us kind of already think about as a myth, but also this notion that they value digital skills. I think the DISC, I'll have to go and double check which one it was, but I've got a feeling the DISC one that was aligned to the wellbeing report, the Australian one actually it would have been, noted that students don't necessarily value digital skills. So again, and there was some stuff that I read around employability, which I mentioned in the blog post, that students that can't necessarily see how what they're learning can be applied in the industry, and maybe this is tied to that. So this myth that maybe students actually, because they're working in digital, that not only are they digital literate, but they actually value digital skills, that it's not necessarily the case. Quite a few reports actually highlighted the fact that students don't necessarily want more online learning. I think for some students, who need that flexibility, it's important, but the near future what actually was saying students don't want too much technology. They want to still have a human connection. So thinking about the way we move towards the future, and in that there's often been a big push that we move everything online as as a way to I guess meet scale, or meet other commercial needs or financial needs, but some students see that as a negative in a few different ways. We can't train for jobs that don't exist yet. Well, we can't train for jobs. We don't know what the jobs are, but we can. A lot of the literature is saying that soft skills, so things like communication, digital literacy, teamwork, problem solving, are all skills that are going to be needed in the future, and we can train for that. So thinking about how we can best support our students. I was going to say young people, but it's not necessarily young people. How we support our students in that is something that I think is really worth thinking about. And then this one, which didn't necessarily come out of all of the literature, but there are a couple of things that came out of around the ways that students, wanted more flexibility or wanted things to be a bit more seamless, and that was often around even just things like enrollment or queuing for certain things. And I think, I'm also guilty of it, that I tend to think about the student experience sometimes as being about the online experience or about the classroom experience, when in fact it's the whole experience, from enrollment, from even prior to enrollment, really, all the way to graduation and beyond. And so thinking about that, there's a whole different points of contact there that students have, that
Okay.
are touch points.
I'm just going to stop you there because we're kind of at the
sorry.
halfway point. There are a couple of questions in the that's okay. Thanks first of all, Kate. That was really good. There's a couple of questions in the chat. So there's one by Hans Telstra. I wonder how these taxonomies could and should influence the graduate attributes universities adopt.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to recognise that a lot of these things are actually interconnected. So you've got things like industry partnerships, work integrated learning, micro credentials, digital literacy. To me, they're not all these separate pieces. They're all actually interconnected. So it would be nice to look at ways to best leverage and capitalize on that, and to, I think in institutions we tend to work in silos, and that can be really problematic. How we get beyond that, I'm not sure, but I think it goes to Sarah's point a little bit around, how do we, build connection? How do we make things more human? How do we unpack and start to dismantle some of those systemic issues? So yeah, I mean, I don't have necessarily have a solution in mind, but I think we're kind of all speaking the same language in a lot of ways.
Okay. We'll leave it there because we'll move on to Marlene. But thanks very much, Kate. That's really, really good.
Yeah.
So
Thanks for that.
hang
I'll
on.
stop sharing. Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess while
Oh,
you're setting Marlene up, I guess the thing that I wanted to end on was just that I think as TELedvisors, we're in a really great spot potentially to consider what Tel should be like. And we can be agents of change potentially. It might mean that we need to rethink our roles and to maybe, work at different levels or, try and change things from the inside. But, the fact that we are thinking ethically about the technology is something that doesn't always get considered, especially by, say, vendors. So I think we need more people like us at the, in different levels in institutions and in, say, technology companies.
thanks, Kate.